I don't understand how we got so toxic and just so divided and so bitter. And I get why sometimes people just don't want to pay attention to it. And we all have friends like that. We have family members who just like, it's all a circus out there. I get that.
So yesterday we learned that Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, a retired four-star general, confirmed that while Donald Trump was president, he said he wanted generals like Adolf Hitler had.
You know, the media is running with it because this is the commentary that we've heard from people like Kamala Harris, jumping at the chance to compare Donald Trump to Hitler.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism.
He knows what these comments mean to so many Jewish Americans, whether they're on the left or on the right. He knows what it means when you compare anyone to Hitler, when you make such accusations that are truly laughable, except for the part that really Kamala Harris has missed, which is that anti-Semitism has skyrocketed in this country over the last year or so, since October 7th.
If you don't want to be called Nazis, stop doing it.
You've been called an anti-Semite more than anyone else's table.
Yeah.
And people will sit there and, no, by me. I never called you an anti-Semite. Okay. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians, so I'm used to it.
Yeah, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is that...
you just say I should die?
You should not.
No,
Did you just say I should be killed?
No, I didn't.
Of course, he goes straight into victim mode, interpreting the comment as some sort of a death threat. He did say, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. He didn't want it to explode. And the hysteria continued.
All right, defend Rudy Giuliani.
I wasn't going to entertain nonsense today. And so at this point,
this is what we're in now. This is America in 2024.
Here's what I will say.
Forget the racism.
That's right.
It's I should die.
I didn't say that. You should die.
What does beeper mean? Don't give me your
I did not say you should die.
Why did you say with my beeper?
So what did you mean?
What did you mean by the beeper?
So what did you mean?
What did you mean by the beeper? No, you didn't. You said, I hope your beeper doesn't go off.
Ryan, stop talking.
At least have the guts to support your racist comment.
Hang on.
I'm so sorry. But I will tell you, I don't accept that apology, and you didn't even say it to me.
That's fine. I didn't say it to you.
That was disgusting. But I can be offended when you don't even say it to me. I'm not Puerto Rican, but I was offended by what he said yesterday.
The hyperbole is off the charts. That lone conservative was taken off air, and now Army has been banned from CNN.
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of CNN is unconscionable, and it's un-American.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up.
The total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
But we've had some of the best pictures visually from this election in the last few hours. So I just want to show you some fresh ones that we've had just come into the newsroom. So these are pictures of Joe Biden with kids visiting the White House in their costumes. Now, this always gives us some pictures, but this is an interesting one because we've seen these photos already circulating of Joe Biden biting the leg of a baby dressed like a turkey. So it doesn't seem like the baby was too upset, but it's certainly one of those odd moments that just after his latest gaffe is now playing into this broader picture of Biden taking attention away from Kamala Harris. And this is the big problem her campaign's had since day one, taking over the ticket from Joe Biden, who's never explicitly given a reason why he stepped down other than he thought that someone else might have a better shot at winning.
This week, Kamala has been comparing her political opponents to the most evil mass murderers in history. And now, speaking on a call for her campaign last night, crooked Joe Biden finally said what he and Kamala really think of our supporters. He called them garbage. No way. No way.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams has called out the media for running with these absurd Nazi comparisons instead of the real issues that are facing voters. Let's take a listen.
We're asking questions that is someone a fascist or is someone a Hitler. That's insulting to me. That is insulting. And I'm not going to engage in that. I'm at these town halls talking to people there. They're not asking me these silly questions. We are in this bubble, you know, and I know you guys really believe these stories you're writing. It gives you a lot of clicks. It's exciting and give you headlines. But this is not what New Yorkers and Americans are dealing with, folks.
If you're a Christian and you care deeply about the abortion issue, I understand that, but does that mean you'll support somebody who seems to violate pretty much every precept of the Ten Commandments? If you are a service member and you're somewhat conservative and you're used to voting Republican, I can understand it, but somebody who genuinely does not believe in duty and honor and does not understand why anybody would sacrifice themselves on behalf of their country, why would you do that? If you're a Muslim American and you're upset about what's happening in the Middle East, why would you put your faith in somebody who passed a Muslim ban and repeatedly suggested that somehow you weren't part of our American community? If you're an African American or Latino, if you're from Puerto Rico and you see somebody whose values seem to indicate that you're not part of their equation, how do you think it's okay? How can you tell yourself it's okay as long as our side wins?
And trying to tell the American people the opposite of what our reality is. For example, calling our Madison Square Garden rally just the other day a Nazi rally, which I thought was one of the most disgraceful attacks that we've had against Trump and his supporters over the last 8 years, was also as far from the truth as it possibly could have been. I was there with thousands of other Jewish Americans. There were Israeli flags in the crowd, Jewish songs being sung, prayers actually that were made while we were in the audience. And I think more people should pay attention to the reality and not to the words coming out of this administration, who we now know views us in probably the worst light possible.
Isn't that interesting, your take? You were attending the rally, and this is how the left-wing media has gone to run with it.
There is fresh backlash against Trump's rally in New York City on Sunday, including from many top Republicans who are distancing themselves from the vile, racist, and sexist comments that were made.
The stuff last night was so over the top, it's unbelievable. You know how many Puerto Rican voters there are in Pennsylvania? 273,000. This is going to cost him votes.
It's worth noting that while we showed you that joke about the pile of garbage that comedian made, he also said something else about Latino voters that I can't play because I know a lot of you are probably at the breakfast table with your little kids, and if we played it, you'd have to shut us off.
That's just some of the coverage focused entirely on a joke that didn't go down well. But as you mentioned, the left are so desperate to smear Trump, they play the Hitler card.
We want to do the same thing here. We want to communicate the right way. I think this whole climate change dialogue is not going to work. I think this has been used for the last few decades. I think we should address it directly, what it is, which is pollution. We want to terminate pollution. That is the message we should go and get out there. And I think that it doesn't matter if it's the Chinese or the Russians, whoever it is, we maybe don't agree with them, but we all have to bring them in and we all have to work together with them.
When it comes to climate change and climate alarmism, it's almost pointless fighting back. We're overwhelmed by it, aren't we? But I'm going to keep pointing it out because, facts matter. Now, people hate to challenge this stuff because then you're called a climate denier and you're mocked and shunned and even abused. So for the record, yes, the climate is changing. It's always changing. It's always either warming or cooling. And there is evidence to suggest that, yes, we might be in a warming phase. And yes, I accept the science that human-produced carbon emissions can exacerbate this warming. But the extent to which this is happening is an ongoing matter of scientific research, obviously. But the last thing we need to do is exaggerate, catastrophise and frighten people. The CSIRO here in Australia has released its latest State of the Climate report. And as usual, it's all couched as bad news.
And globally, 2023 was the warmest year on record. Australia is also continuing to warm, in line with global trends. The warming has led to an increase in the frequency of extreme heat events.
Well, they're the scientists, and that's what they say, in cahoots with their comms people, I guess. But the point is, they don't give you all the information. They don't share information that provides context or that might fuel proper, informed scientific scepticism about their claims. For instance, in that clip, you would have seen that the graphs started from 1910. And indeed, in the report itself, we are told that Australia's climate has warmed by an average of 1.5 degrees since national records began in 1910. Well, national records did not begin in 1910. In many places, they go back many decades earlier. But our Weather Bureau only uses the records from 1910 onwards. It has its own scientific reasons for doing this, consistency of measurement devices and the like. But the fact remains it chooses to ignore earlier temperatures. This means that one of the hottest and driest decades, the 1890s, is left out of the records, some would say conveniently. The warming trend might seem much lower or even disappear altogether if earlier temperatures were included. For instance, as you can see in this graph from the Institute of Public Affairs, the temperature record in Darwin would look entirely different if the early recordings, shown here in green, were included. Similar analysis can and has been compiled for many other sites. But it gets worse. What the Weather Bureau and the CSIRO also don't talk about enough is that the records they use have been homogenised. That is, they've been adjusted. So many temperature recordings from the early part of the 20th century, after 1910, have been reduced. They've been adjusted downwards because they reckon they must have been improperly recorded. So many maximum temperature records announced now, these days, are actually not the highest temperature readings from those locations. The new records are not the highest temperatures recorded, but temperatures that are higher than what the earlier readings have been reduced to. Now, I'm not suggesting anything improper. The scientific community justifies these adjustments, but I am suggesting a lack of transparency and an unwillingness from the Weather Bureau and the CSIRO to discuss these matters. It's important information because it underscores the lack of certainty. The Weather Bureau and the CSIRO prefer to keep it simple, certain and scary.